The blizzard came down like judgment itself, white and cold and merciless. Charles Brennan pulled his coat tighter and leaned forward in the lead carriage, squinting through snow that turned the Montana mountain pass into a wall of nothing. Beside him, 6-year-old Daniel pressed close, small hands clutching his father's arm. How much farther? Papa. Not long now, Charles lied. They were 3 hours behind schedule, maybe more. The Helena investors wouldn't wait past noon tomorrow, and midnight was already 2 hours gone. Behind them, 2 freight wagons struggled through drifts that swallowed the wheels to their hubs. 8 men total, counting drivers and guards. A fortune in mining contracts rode on tomorrow's meeting. Warren Mitchell, Charles's business partner, had made that clear a dozen times today. The horses stumbled. Charles called for a slower pace. The wind howled in answer, driving snow horizontal across the pass. Then he saw it, a dark shape half buried in the drift where the road bent north. Hold! Charles raised his hand. The convoy creaked to a stop. Warren thrust his head out from the second carriage. What now, Charles? We can't afford another delay. Charles was already climbing down. His boots sank into snow past his knees. He waded forward, heart hammering with a dread he couldn't name. Not a fallen tree, not a dead horse. A woman. She lay crumpled on her side, one arm stretched toward the road as if she'd been reaching for help when consciousness left her. Snow had already begun burying her dark coat. Her face was blue-white in the lantern light, lips the color of ash. Dear God. Charles dropped to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her face with bare hands. Her skin was ice. She's alive! Barely! Warren appeared at his shoulder, breathing hard. Charles, we don't have time for this. We're already... Get blankets. Charles snapped. Whiskey, move. The Helena investors won't wait. Charles looked up at his partner. 5 years they'd worked together, built an empire from copper and sweat and calculated risk. Warren was practical, ambitious, ruthless when business demanded it. All qualities Charles had valued. Until this moment. A woman is dying, Charles said quietly. The meeting can wait. $1 million expansion can't. Charles turned back to the woman. He couldn't see her breathing, couldn't find a pulse in her frozen wrist, but something in her face, the determined set of her chin even in unconsciousness. The work-worn hands. The threadbare coat over a simple dress spoke of someone who'd fought hard just to survive this long. Someone who deserved better than dying alone in a snowdrift. Get her in the wagon. Charles ordered the men who'd gathered. Now, carefully. Warren swore, low and vicious, but the men obeyed Charles, not him. They always had. As they lifted her, her head lolled back. Charles supported it with one hand, and for just a moment thought he saw something familiar in her features. But that was impossible. He'd never seen this woman before in his life. Daniel watched from the carriage window, his young face solemn, as they passed, carrying the frozen woman like a corpse that might yet breathe. The boy's eyes went wide. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. They got her into Warren's carriage where there was more room. The men worked fast, wrapping her in every blanket and fur they carried. Someone produced a flask of whiskey. Charles forced a few drops past her gray lips. Rub her hands, he ordered. Get the blood moving. The carriage rocked as men crowded in. Lantern light swayed across the woman's face. She was young, Charles realized, maybe 30. Hard living had carved lines around her eyes, but underneath was a quiet beauty that poverty and hardship couldn't quite erase. Warren stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Charles, listen to me. We lose this contract. We lose everything. The mine expansion depends on Helena capital. Without it, I know what's at stake. Neither do you, because right now you're throwing away months of work for a stranger who'll probably die anyway. Charles didn't look up from rubbing circulation back into the woman's frozen fingers. She's not dead yet. She will be, and so will our partnership if we miss tomorrow's deadline. The woman's eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved, shaping words without sound. One of the men held whiskey to her mouth again. This time she swallowed. Charles studied her face, that nagging sense of familiarity growing stronger. Had he seen her before in town? Perhaps at one of the mining camps. Then Daniel spoke from the corner where he'd been watching, quiet as a ghost. "Papa." Something in his son's voice made Charles's blood run cold. He turned. Daniel's face was white, his eyes enormous. "Papa, that's the lady." The carriage went silent. Even Warren stopped his muttering. "What lady?" "Son." "From the hotel." Daniel's voice was small but certain. "In San Francisco. When the horse was running, she's the one who pushed me." Time seemed to stop. Charles stared at the unconscious woman, and suddenly the familiarity clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. The hotel courtyard. 3 months ago. Business trip to San Francisco. Daniel playing near the fountain, while Charles met with investors inside. Then shouting. The thunder of hooves on cobblestones. Charles running outside to find his son crying but unhurt. A woman in a laundry apron limping away through the crowd. A runaway horse. Someone had told him. Your boy stepped right into its path. That laundry woman there, she shoved him clear. Took the blow herself. Brave thing? Foolish. Maybe. But brave. Charles had tried to find her. Searched the hotel. Questioned every servant. Helen, they'd said. Works in the laundry. Left this morning. Said she had family up north. He'd hired investigators. Spent a fortune tracking down every Helen who'd worked in San Francisco that summer. Found nothing. And now she lay dying in his arms. Are you certain? Charles whispered. Daniel nodded. I remember her face. Papa. She looked at me kind. Even when she was hurt. I remember... Warren's expression shifted from anger to calculation. The woman from San Francisco. The one you spent 3 months searching for. Charles couldn't speak. His hands were shaking as he brushed snow from her hair. 3 months. Thousands of dollars. Every investigator and agency between here and California. And fate had dropped her in a snowdrift 50 miles from his home, barely alive. Exactly where his path would cross hers. Providence or coincidence. He didn't know. Didn't care. The woman's eyes opened briefly, confused, unfocused. They found Charles's face and held there for a heartbeat before closing again. I found you, he whispered. This time, I won't let you disappear. Warren saw Charles's face and knew whatever argument he'd been building died unspoken. The Helena meeting was already lost. The $1 million expansion was done. Charles had found something he wanted more. Warren took the other men ahead to find shelter. 5 miles north was a trading post run by a Chinese couple who'd survived 2 decades on the frontier by being practical about who they helped. They'd have beds, or at least warm floors, food, safety. Charles refused to leave Helen's side. I'll bring the wagon up slow, he told Warren. You go ahead. Get rooms ready. Warren's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Probably. This woman, you don't even know her. I know she saved my son's life. And you've already repaid that debt 10 times over, searching for her, spending a fortune. This is... Warren stopped, shook his head. This is madness. Charles, over a woman who'll be gone again the moment she's on her feet. Charles looked at Helen. Sleeping now in the nest of blankets they'd made. Color was returning to her cheeks. Her breathing had steadied. She would live, he thought. She had to. Go ahead, he said. We'll follow. Warren left without another word. Alone except for the driver up front. Charles sat beside Helen and let himself remember. 4 years since Amelia died. Fever took her in 3 days. Left him with a 2-year-old son and a mining fortune he'd trade entirely to have her back. He'd thrown himself into work, building empire. But Daniel remained the center of everything. His boy. His world, his reason for breathing. When the horse almost killed Daniel that day in San Francisco, Charles had seen his entire life trampled into dust in the space of a heartbeat. The terror of it watching his son step into that path, too far away to reach him. Seeing those iron-shod hooves descending, then the woman in the apron, diving forward with no thought for herself, taking the blow that would have killed Daniel, saving him. Charles had held his sobbing son and watched her limp away into the crowd, and something in him broke, or maybe healed. He didn't know which. Finding her had become an obsession, not just to thank her, not just to repay the debt, but because Daniel had said, that night when the nightmares came. She looked at me like Mama used to. Papa. Kind. And Charles realized his son needed something he couldn't give. Needed softness, gentleness. A love that wasn't filtered through fear of loss. Needed a woman's touch. Maybe that was madness. Thinking one stranger could fill the hole Amelia left? Probably was. But when every investigator came back empty, when every lead died, Charles had felt that hole growing wider, not just in Daniel, in himself. Now here she was, delivered by fate or providence or blind luck into his hands. The storm was breaking. Through gaps in the clouds, stars appeared, cold and distant and beautiful. Charles adjusted the blanket around Helen's shoulders. Her face in sleep looked peaceful. Young, unburdened by whatever had brought her to that snowdrift, starving and frozen and alone. I don't know what this means yet, he whispered. But you saved my son. Saved the only thing in this world that matters to me. So now I save you. However long it takes, whatever it costs. Outside, the wind died, the snow stopped falling, and in the silence, Charles thought he heard something like an answer. Helen woke to warmth, real warmth, for the first time in days, maybe weeks. She was in a bed, an actual bed with sheets and quilts and a pillow that smelled of lavender. Lamplight flickered on rough wooden walls. Somewhere nearby, a fire crackled. A woman's face appeared above her. Asian features, kind eyes, silver threading through her black hair. Easy now, the woman said. You've been very sick. Helen tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her chest, old pain, familiar. The cracked ribs from 3 months ago, never properly healed. She gasped and fell back. Don't rush. The woman spooned something warm into Helen's mouth. Broth. Chicken and vegetables and salt. The most delicious thing Helen had ever tasted. My name is Lin Chen. This is my trading post. You're safe here. Safe. Helen almost laughed. She hadn't been safe since leaving St. Louis 2 years ago. Maybe longer. How did I? Her voice cracked. Barely a whisper. Men found you in the snow, brought you here half frozen. That was 2 days ago. 2 days. Helen tried to remember. Walking from Butte, fired from the boarding house for being too sickly to scrub floors properly. Heading to Helena where her sister Margaret lived. Had a little shop. Had promised Helen could stay until she found work. Running out of money. Running out of strength. The cold getting worse. Then nothing. The men who brought me. Helen managed. They're still here. Some left. The boy's father stayed. Boy's father. Something in those words triggered memory. Helen closed her eyes and saw a courtyard. Cobblestones. A horse with wild eyes and trailing reins, galloping straight toward a child. A little boy with dark curls, maybe 6 years old, stepping into its path without seeing. Helen running. No thought, just motion, grabbing the child, shoving him aside. The horse's shoulders slamming into her ribs like a hammer. Pain. The boy crying, hands helping her up. A man's voice asking if she was all right. She'd lied, said yes, and limped away before anyone could make a fuss. Before the boy's father could ask questions or offer money or no, Helen whispered. The door opened. A child appeared. The same dark curls, the same wide brown eyes. You remember me? The boy asked. Helen's breath caught. The hotel. The horse. You're alive. Because of you. A man's voice, deep and gentle. Charles Brennan stepped into the room, and Helen's heart nearly stopped. Everyone in Montana knew Charles Brennan, the Copper King, richest man between here and San Francisco. His mining operations employed half the territory. His name appeared in newspapers beside governors and senators, and she'd saved his son, then run away like a thief. Why did you leave? Charles asked. No anger in it, just honest confusion. I searched for you, spent 3 months trying to find you. Helen looked away. Shame burned her cheeks. Men like you don't mix with women like me. Mr. Brennan, I did what anyone would do. Didn't need thanks or payment or family. Daniel interrupted. He climbed onto the bed, took her hand in both of his small ones. Papa looked everywhere. He was sad. Charles's expression confirmed it. This powerful man, this mining magnate, had mourned her absence, had searched, had cared. The door opened again. Another man entered, face hard and impatient. Charles, the Helena investors sent word. If we don't arrive by tomorrow noon, they're moving to Colorado interests. Charles didn't look at him. Send a telegram. Warren, tell them I'm delayed. Delayed you're throwing away. Warren stopped, glanced at Helen, recalibrated. This is madness. This is Providence. This is a woman you don't even know. Charles's voice went quiet. Dangerous. She's the woman who saved my son's life, who valued his safety above her own, who disappeared rather than burden me with obligation. He finally looked at Warren. She's family now. The meeting can wait. Warren's face purpled, but he left without another word. Helen stared at Charles. Family. The word echoed in her mind like something from a dream. I don't understand, she whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand. You saved me. Now we save you. Charles smiled. Gentle and real and completely without calculation. Rest now? We'll talk more when you're stronger. But you're not alone anymore, Helen. Not if you don't want to be. He turned to leave. Daniel following. At the door. Charles paused. I found you, he said softly. This time, I'm not letting go. 3 days at the trading post. The storm passed, leaving clear skies and bitter cold. Warren wanted to push on to Helena. Charles refused. Another day. He kept saying, she needs to recover. Helen sat by the fire, wrapped in borrowed quilts, and listened to her world shift on its axis. Mrs. Chen brought soup and bread. Daniel brought questions. Where are you from? Do you have family? Why were you walking in the snow? Helen answered carefully. Orphaned at 16 when cholera took her parents in St. Louis. Came west 2 years ago following her older sister Margaret, who'd married a shopkeeper in Helena. Worked whatever job she could find: laundry, cooking, cleaning. Saved every penny for passage north. San Francisco was supposed to be temporary. She said, just long enough to earn train fare. Then that last day, she looked at Daniel. You stepped into the street. The horse was running. I just moved. Didn't think. The horse hit you, Daniel said solemnly. I saw. Helen touched her ribs through the borrowed nightgown Mrs. Chen had given her. Cracked 3 ribs. Maybe 4. Couldn't afford a doctor. So I wrapped them tight and left the next morning. Thought it would heal on its own. Did it? Charles asked from the doorway. Helen hadn't heard him enter. She shook her head. Hurts when I breathe deep. Probably always will. Charles's expression darkened. You were injured saving my son, and I let you walk away. You didn't let me do anything. Mr. Brennan, I chose to leave. Charles, he corrected. And why refuse help? Helen met his eyes. Because help from rich men always comes with strings. Because I don't take charity. Because, she stopped, voice catching. Because women like me don't belong in the world of men like you. Silence. Even Daniel seemed to hold his breath. Then Charles crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. Eye level. Close enough she could see gold flecks in his brown eyes. You're wrong, he said quietly. You belong wherever you choose to be. And I'm not offering charity. I'm offering gratitude, friendship, maybe, if you'll allow it, family. I'm a laundry woman. You're the woman who saved my son. That doesn't change what I am. No. Charles smiled. It shows who you are. And who you are is someone I want in my life, in Daniel's life. Someone worth knowing. Helen felt tears coming and hated herself for it. She'd survived 2 years on the frontier by being hard, by not needing anyone, by not letting hope in to wound her when it died. But Daniel's small hand found hers, and Charles's eyes held nothing but sincerity. Stay, Daniel whispered, please. That night, after Charles had read Daniel to sleep in the room Mrs. Chen provided, Warren cornered him by the fire. You're risking everything, Warren hissed. Our partnership. The investors, the mine's future. For what guilt? Some misplaced sense of nobility. Charles stared into the flames. I know what I'm risking. Do you? Because from where I stand, you're throwing away 5 years of work for a woman you've known 3 days. A woman who'll leave again the moment she's strong enough. She won't leave. How do you know? Charles looked at his partner. They'd built an empire together, made each other rich. But standing here now, Charles realized he barely knew the man. Because Daniel needs her. Charles said, and maybe I do too. Warren's expression turned ugly. You're a fool. Probably. When this ends badly and it will don't come crying to me, Warren stalked off. Charles stayed by the fire, watching shadows dance on the walls. Across the room, Helen watched him from her doorway. Their eyes met. Neither spoke, but something passed between them in the silence. Something that felt like the beginning of understanding. The Brennan estate sat on 300 acres of prime Montana land, overlooking the valley where Helena sprawled like a promise. Stone house, 3 stories. More rooms than Charles could remember. Amelia had loved it. After she died, it became a mausoleum. Helen stood in the circular drive, staring up at columns and windows and wealth beyond imagining. Mrs. Chen had provided a decent traveling dress, but Helen still felt like a beggar at a king's gate. It's too much, she whispered. It's home. Charles said, and you're welcome here as long as you need. Daniel grabbed her hand. I'll show you everything. The library and the horses and the kitchen where Cook makes gingerbread. Daniel, Charles's voice was gentle but firm. Let Helen settle first. She's still recovering. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davison, greeted them with professional warmth. The butler, Gerard, was coldly polite. Both clearly wondered who this strange woman was and why Mr. Brennan had brought her home instead of sending her to the boarding house in town. Helen wondered the same thing. Her room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking gardens buried in snow. The bed was bigger than her entire room at the San Francisco boarding house. Silk curtains, Persian rug, furniture that cost more than she'd earned in 2 years. She sat on the bed and wanted to cry. A knock. Mrs. Davison entered with tea and sandwiches. Mr. Brennan thought you might be hungry. Thank you. The housekeeper lingered. May I ask, Miss, how long will you be staying? Helen heard the real question beneath. Who are you? What do you want? I don't know, Helen said honestly. Mr. Brennan was kind enough to offer. Mr. Brennan is a very kind man, Mrs. Davison said. Too kind, some would say, after Mrs. Brennan passed. There were those who tried to take advantage of his grief and his generosity. Helen's face burned. I'm not trying to take advantage of anyone. Of course not. Miss, I meant no offense. Just... The housekeeper smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Brennan has position to consider, and young Daniel's future. People talk. She left. Helen sat alone, the warning clear, that afternoon. Warren arrived with guests. 2 women in expensive dresses and cruel smiles, Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Cole, pillars of Helena society. Charles mentioned his mysterious house guest, Mrs. Whitmore said. Voice dripping honey and poison. We simply had to meet her. They found Helen in the library, where Daniel was showing her his favorite books. The women's eyes traveled over Helen's borrowed dress, her work-roughened hands, her simple hair. How charming, Mrs. Cole said. Charles always did have such a soft heart for unfortunates. The word landed like a slap. Daniel frowned. Helen's not unfortunate. She saved my life. Of course she did, darling. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was all teeth. And your father is rewarding her generosity. How lovely. After they left, Helen excused herself and fled to her room. She pressed her ear to the door and heard voices drifting up from Charles's study below. Warren's voice, harsh and cutting. A laundry woman. Charles, in your home. People are talking. About your judgment, your fitness as a father. Let them talk. Daniel's reputation will suffer. Helen's hands shook. She'd known this would happen. Known her presence would bring trouble. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. She couldn't stay. Wouldn't destroy this family just because they'd shown her kindness. That night, she sat with Daniel one last time, reading him stories about knights and dragons and impossible quests. When she finished, he looked up with tears in his eyes. Are you leaving? Helen tried to smile. Failed. I have to... Because of what those ladies said. Because we're rich and you're not... Because I don't belong here. Sweetheart. Daniel's voice broke. You belong with me. He cried himself to sleep in her arms. Helen held him and felt her heart shatter into pieces she'd never be able to gather up again. Pre-dawn, Helen moved through the silent house with her few belongings in a borrowed carpet bag. She'd left 2 notes on her pillow, one thanking Charles, one for Daniel explaining why she had to go. Her sister's address in Helena was only 3 miles. She could walk it before breakfast. She reached the front hall, touched the door handle. You're running again. Helen spun. Charles stood in the shadows, lamp in hand, still in yesterday's clothes, as if he'd never gone to bed. I'm doing what's right, she said. Running is right. You don't understand. I understand you're afraid. He set the lamp down, moved closer. I heard what Warren said, what those women implied, and I understand why that would make you want to leave. Then let me go. I can't. Helen's composure cracked. You think I want this? I've never felt safer or more valued than these past days. But I'm not blind. I heard Warren. I saw how those women looked at me. I'm a scandal waiting to happen, and Daniel deserves better. Daniel deserves you. The words hung between them like a bridge. I'm a laundry woman, Helen whispered. You're the bravest person I know. Charles took another step, careful, asking permission with every movement. You threw yourself in front of a horse to save a stranger's child. You walked through a blizzard with cracked ribs and no food rather than ask for help. You've survived things that would break most people. That's not a laundry woman. That's a warrior. Charles, I've made mistakes. He continued. Put business before people. Thought money could solve everything. But I learned something the day that horse almost took my son. Nothing matters except who you love and who loves you back. Helen's vision blurred. I don't fit in your world. Then we'll make a new world. One where kindness matters more than station. Where character trumps class. Where family is chosen, not inherited. He reached for her hand, held it gently. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to stop running long enough to see what this could become. Footsteps on the stairs. They both turned. Daniel stood at the top in his nightshirt, bare feet on cold marble. His face was wet with tears. Don't go, Helen, he called down, voice breaking. Please don't go. I need you. We both do. Helen looked between them, father and son, wealthy and innocent, offering her everything she'd ever wanted and everything she feared to want. She'd already chosen them once, 3 months ago. Chose to throw herself before death to save a child she didn't know. Chose pain and injury over his suffering. Why was she running from that choice now? Through the window behind Charles. First light broke over the mountains. Dawn after the longest night. Winter's darkness giving way to something that might become spring. Helen set down her bag. I don't know how to be in your world, she said. Charles smiled, real and warm and full of hope. Then we'll figure it out together. Daniel flew down the stairs and crashed into her arms. Helen held him tight, ribs aching, heart fuller than she'd thought possible. Outside. The sun rose. Inside, something broken began to heal. New Year's Eve. The Brennan estate blazed with light and music. Helena's finest gathered in the grand ballroom, mining investors, railroad executives, merchants, judges, politicians. The social event of the season? Warren assumed Helen would stay hidden in her room. He'd planned the guest list accordingly, invited the right people. Positioned himself to salvage what he could of Charles's reputation after the unfortunate incident with the laundry woman. Then Charles appeared at the top of the ballroom stairs with Helen on one arm and Daniel on the other. The room went silent. Helen wore a dress Mrs. Davison had found in storage, one of Amelia's, altered to fit. Simple blue silk, elegant without ostentation. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the determined line of her jaw. She was terrified, but she didn't run. Charles led her down the stairs. Every eye followed. He stopped in the center of the ballroom, raised his voice so all could hear. Thank you all for coming tonight. Before we begin the new year, I want to introduce someone very important to my family. He gestured to Helen. This is Miss Helen Cartwright. 3 months ago, she saved my son's life. Threw herself in front of a runaway horse to push Daniel clear, taking a blow that would have killed him. She disappeared before I could thank her. I spent 3 months searching, and Providence brought her back to us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not all kind. Charles continued. Some of you may find it unusual that I've opened my home to a woman of modest means. Let me be clear about something. Miss Cartwright showed more nobility in one moment than most of us demonstrate in a lifetime. She sacrificed her safety for a stranger's child, asked nothing in return, left rather than burden me with obligation. Warren's face was purple. Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Cole whispered behind fans. I spent 3 months searching for her. Charles said, not to discharge a debt, there is no debt between family. But because my son needed her, because she represents something I'd forgotten in my grief and my work. She represents goodness without calculation, courage without reward, love without condition. He turned to Helen, took her hand. Some of you will judge this choice. Some of you already have. That's your right. But understand this, my son's future doesn't rest in Helena society's approval. It rests in him growing up knowing that character matters more than class. That kindness is strength. That family is chosen through love. not purchased through position. Warren stepped forward. Last desperate attempt. Charles, think about Daniel's future, his education, his place in society. You're jeopardizing everything for sentiment. Charles's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I'm securing everything that matters. Daniel's future is knowing that his father chose love over approval, chose integrity over investment, chose family over fortune. He faced the crowd. If my choices offend you, the door is there, but Miss Cartwright stays, as does my son. And if Helena cannot accept that, then Helena has nothing I need. Silence, heavy and absolute. Then movement. Judge Morrison, oldest and most respected man in the territory, began to clap. Slow, deliberate. His wife joined him. Then others. Not everyone. Warren stormed out, taking Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. Cole, and a dozen others with him. But enough stayed. Enough smiled at Helen with something approaching respect. The music resumed. Champagne flowed. Daniel laughed and tugged Helen toward the refreshment table. Charles stood alone for a moment, watching his world split in two. The people who left were the ones who valued appearance over substance. Good riddance. The ones who stayed were the ones worth knowing. Judge Morrison approached, extended his hand. Well said, Charles. Your Amelia would be proud. Charles shook his hand. Thank you. The boy needs a mother, and you need a partner who sees your heart, not just your bank account. The judge glanced at Helen, laughing with Daniel over petit fours. She's good people. Anyone with eyes can see that. Later, when midnight came and went, and most guests had departed, Charles found Helen on the terrace. She stood alone in the cold, stars bright overhead. Regretting staying, he asked. Helen smiled. Regretting everything I did before staying. Warren dissolved our partnership tonight. Some business connections went cold. There will be consequences. I'm sorry. I'm not. Charles joined her at the rail. I spent 4 years building an empire I thought would matter. Turns out I was building the wrong thing. A house isn't a home. A fortune isn't a family. I forgot that. You reminded me. They stood in comfortable silence. Inside, Daniel was falling asleep on Mrs. Davison's lap by the fire. What happens now? Helen asked. Now Charles took her hand, gentle, asking. Now we build something real, however long it takes. Helen laced her fingers through his. However long it takes. Above them, stars wheeled. The old year died, the new one was born, and in the space between, something precious began to grow. March came soft to Montana. Snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth and the promise of green. At the Brennan estate, winter's grip finally loosened. Helen stood in the garden plot behind the main house, hands deep in soil. Tomato seedlings waited in their pots, ready for planting. The sun was warm on her shoulders. Real warmth, the kind that promised summer. You're doing it wrong, Daniel announced. He crouched beside her, serious as a professor. Cook says you need to dig deeper. Does she now? She says lots of things, mostly about you and Papa. Helen's hand stilled. What kind of things? Good things? Daniel started digging with a trowel that was comically large for his small hands. She says Papa smiles now, says the house feels like a home again, says you're good for us. Helen's throat tightened. 3 months since New Year's. 3 months of slow, careful building. Warren had dissolved their partnership, and some of Helena's society had turned cold. But Judge Morrison and others had stepped forward. The mine was expanding differently now, smaller, steadier, but still profitable. More importantly, the house had changed. Flowers appeared in vases. Bread smelled fresh each morning. Daniel's laughter echoed through halls that had been silent for years. And Charles, what are you two plotting out here? Helen looked up. Charles stood at the garden gate, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair ruffled by wind. He'd sold the formal carriages, simplified his operations. The empire that once consumed him was now just business. Important, but not everything. Planting, Daniel announced. Helen says we'll have tomatoes by summer. Will we now? Charles joined them in the dirt, kneeling between them. I'm an investor, not a farmer. But I trust her judgment. Helen handed him a seedling. Dig there, not too deep. They worked together in comfortable silence. Three people who'd been separate, building something from soil and hope. Helen had found her sister Margaret 3 weeks after New Year's, brought her to Sunday dinners, expanding the family circle. Margaret approved of Charles, of the house, of how happy Helen looked. You were dying on that road. Margaret had whispered. Dying slow, piece by piece. Now look at you. Helen hadn't known how to explain that she'd been dying for years, since her parents passed. Since coming west alone. Since learning that survival wasn't the same as living. Until a blizzard and a convoy and a choice that changed everything. Done, Daniel declared. He patted soil around the last seedling with satisfaction. Now what? Now we wait, Helen said, and water them, and watch them grow. Like us, Daniel said. Helen and Charles exchanged glances. The boy was too perceptive by half. That evening, they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Daniel had fallen asleep between them, head on Helen's lap. Charles covered him with a blanket. I kept searching, Charles said quietly. Even when everyone said stop, even when it seemed hopeless. Something told me if I found you, everything else would make sense. Did it? Helen asked. More than I dreamed. He took her hand. They hadn't rushed into anything formal. No proposals, no promises beyond the day. But everyone who saw them knew this was family already. The love was there in small moments, her hand on his arm, his smile when she entered a room, the way they orbited Daniel like twin sons. I walked for days, Helen said, freezing and starving and alone. Thought I'd die on that road. Probably should have. But you didn't. No, she smiled. I collapsed exactly where your convoy would find me. You think that's coincidence? I think some things are worth every mile walked through the snow. Inside, lamps glowed warm. The house that had been a monument to loss was now a home built on second chances. In the garden, tomato seedlings reached toward tomorrow. Helen thought about the woman she'd been desperate, alone, believing she had to earn every scrap of kindness. That woman had died in a snowdrift. The one who woke in Charles's wagon was different, braver, willing to believe that family could be chosen, not just inherited. That love could arrive in a blizzard and stay through spring. Daniel stirred in his sleep, murmured something that sounded like, Mama. Neither Charles nor Helen corrected him. Some words chose themselves. Above them, the first stars appeared. The same stars that had watched over a dying woman and a stopped convoy. The same stars that had witnessed a choice made in a San Francisco courtyard 3 months before fate delivered its answer. Spring came, Helen whispered. Charles squeezed her hand. After the longest winter, they sat until full dark, 3 souls breathing as one. The convoy that stopped had become a life restarted. Winter's cruelty had given way to spring's gentleness, and the magnate who thought he'd lost everything when his wife died discovered that family real. Chosen. Sacrificial family had been waiting for him all along, waiting in a snowdrift, waiting to be found, waiting to come home.